This is Michael Cohen, and you're listening to the one and only Mea Culpa podcast, available wherever you listen to podcasts. So make sure that you subscribe to the blue background icon for all new and updated interviews. Now look, I've spent more time than I've ever imagined watching Donald Trump prepare for these major addresses to Congress. I've seen the rehearsals, the edits, the strategic pauses. I know the discipline that it takes for him to stay on script and the calculation behind every line. In this week's joint address to Congress, it wasn't random. It was structured, it was deliberate, and it was aimed squarely at shaping the narrative of his presidency at a moment of economic anxiety and cultural tension. On this episode of Mea Culpa, I previously sat down with political strategist and digital content creator Ally Sammarco to unpack what we witnessed and why it should concern anyone who cares about how political information is consumed coming up into the midterms. So let me be clear, this is not about personality. It is about infrastructure. You see, Trump understands modern media better than most politicians of his generation. He knows that a speech is no longer just a speech. It's raw material, clipped, filtered, amplified, and distributed within minutes across platforms that reach tens and tens of millions, particularly young voters. Now, Ally made a point that should set off alarms inside the Democratic war rooms. And what was that? Gen Z is not getting its political education from traditional news outlets. They're getting it from short-form videos, from influencers, from live stream commentary, and from algorithm-driven feeds that reward emotional punch over nuance. You know, when the president spoke about tariffs, framing them as a tool to strengthen domestic industry, those clips were immediately repackaged into digestible, shareable content. What often gets lost in translation is the economic complexity. You see, tariffs can protect certain sectors. They can also increase costs for consumers and businesses. The long-term impact? Well, it depends on global retaliation, supply chains, and market confidence. But nuance doesn't travel well online. You see, the same dynamic applies to the recent mass firings across federal agencies. And supporters, they view them as necessary shakeup of our bureaucracy. But critics, well, they see institutional destabilization. The truth? The truth is the large-scale personnel changes inside government agencies have ripple effects. We're seeing them right now on regulatory, certainly, investor confidence, and operational continuity. That, my friends, is not partisan. Again, it's structural. And what we talk about that worries Ally, and frankly worries me, it's not that young Americans are engaging politically. It's that they are engaging inside echo chambers that are engineered for reinforcement, not reflection. We also discussed the administration's continued focus on transgender policy and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. These issues, they resonate deeply with parts of the president's base, particularly those who believe cultural institutions have shifted too far, and worse, too fast. For others, these policies represent fundamental civil rights protections. Now, the temperature around these debates, they're rising, and the digital ecosystem, it accelerates that heat. A 45-second clip, stripped of context, can actually generate more engagement than a detailed policy breakdown ever will. And Trump's address, it reflected an understanding that politics today is as much about emotional alignment as legislative substance. He speaks to voters who feel economically squeezed, culturally unsettled, and distrustful of institutions. And that connection should not be dismissed. It needs to be understood, especially as we head to the midterms. And one thing that Ally emphasized is something that Democrats ignore at their own peril, and that is the right has built digital communities that provide identity and belonging, particularly for young men who feel politically homeless. These spaces, they offer narratives that are simple, confident, and emotionally validating. Unfortunately, by contrast, we Democrats, We often communicate in policy white papers and press releases. So if the goal is to counter misinformation, fact-checking alone, well, it's just not sufficient. You cannot spreadsheet your way out of a narrative war. You actually have to compete in the same arenas: short-form video, live-stream debate, creator partnerships, without sacrificing integrity. And that requires investment. It requires message discipline. And it requires acknowledging that young voters are not apathetic. They're just overwhelmed. There's also an economic undercurrent to all of this. And what is that? Inflation anxiety, job market uncertainty, student debt pressures, unaffordability. These are all real stressors. So when a president presents decisive action, even controversial action, because that's what we saw, it can feel stabilizing, at least to those who are looking for some form of clarity. The question is whether that clarity holds under scrutiny. What Ally underscored, it's urgency. You see, if Democrats fail to build a compelling, values-driven digital presence, unfortunately, we will continue to cede ground to narratives that may oversimplify complex issues. And oversimplification, repeated often enough, and we know that's what the GOP does, it becomes a belief. Remember, I've been inside the machinery of political messaging. I've seen how repetition shapes perception. And I've seen how quickly perception hardens into identity. Trust me, I'm going through it personally myself right now. But this moment isn't just about one speech. It's about a generational shift in how democracy is consumed. Congress may be the backdrop, but the real battlefield, it's really the algorithm. And if young voters are increasingly influenced by right-wing digital ecosystems, well, the response cannot be nostalgia for an older media era. It must be innovation grounded in truth. And Trump's address, it demonstrated that he understands that medium. The open question is whether his opponents do. Because if they don't, they won't just lose arguments, they're going to lose the whole generation. And that is as important today as it was when I spoke to Ally several months ago. So let's go now to that conversation. Ally, welcome to Mea Culpa. Look, there's so much to talk about. The hour goes by incredibly fast, so I'm just going to jump right into it. Yesterday, we experienced what one can only describe as a shit show for this joint session of Congress. Now, Trump, during that session, claimed that the new tariffs would protect the soul of our country. What do you think that he meant by that? And you believe tariffs, even if targeted, like what he's doing with Canada, Mexico, and China, can truly serve a moral or a nationalistic purpose in today's global economy?
No. I mean, I think he'd like to think that. I think he views tariffs as a way of exerting control over people. And he likes the word. He said, I love tariffs. Like tariffs are this magical, wonderful thing. And ultimately, of course, Americans are going to be the ones paying the price hikes among many goods, cheap goods and more expensive goods like cars and homes. So that's going to be our problem. And Justin Trudeau said just the other day, he feels sorry for us. I mean, that's just sad. I've never heard an ally of the United States say that before. But he said, this is what your government is doing to you. And we don't want this. We want to get along. We are friends. We're allies. We're neighbors. But Donald Trump has chosen to pick a fight with some of our closest allies like Canada and Ukraine and Mexico. And, he violated his own agreement, which was the U.S. Canada-Mexico agreement, promising not to institute tariffs and to have a free trade agreement. And he made that deal. And then he said that some idiot made that deal. Well, he was the idiot that made that deal. And now he's breaking his own agreement. So here we are. And I think that we are ultimately going to be the ones that pay the price for his decision to do this.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. 27 out of 29 top U.S. economists, and these are top U.S. economists. They are not political. They're just economists. And they all turned around and they said that tariffs will have a detrimental effect on the average American, on all Americans. Now, again, that 1/10 or that 1%, they don't care if their Dodge Ram is $80,000, $100,000, or $500,000. They can't spend their money in 100 lifetimes. But
Right.
no matter how many times people have told this to Trump, he doesn't listen. He doesn't acknowledge that tariffs ultimately get passed down. The expense gets passed down to the consumer, that it does not get borne by the country that is being tariffed. Including in the speech last night, Trump went on and he said the tariffs would cause little disturbance to the economy. Now, with the stock market, as a result of the comments that he's making and the actions that he is doing, went into a free fall as a result. So my question to you is, how realistic is this claim? How will these policies impact middle class and lower middle class families in both the short and the long term?
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's not going to impact the 1%. It's not going to impact Donald Trump. So he doesn't care. He said, oh, you're going to have some temporary inconvenience. Well, it's not for him. It's for everybody else that's going to deal with the temporary inconvenience, which is actually a serious inconvenience. And it's increased the price of goods. Like, people are living paycheck to paycheck. He's never experienced that. And he doesn't care. But ultimately, this is what Trump supporters voted for, because they knew he was going to do this. He said he was going to do it. And they could complain about high prices under Joe Biden all they wanted. And then here Donald Trump is raising them even more, and they're making excuses for him. It's like, I don't really understand the logic behind that. But like you said, the economy is just crashing more than we've ever seen. Joe Biden left office with record high economy and record high stock market. And currently, the Dow Jones has dropped 650 points, and the S&P 500 is down, I think it's 1.5%. So that's people's 401ks, their retirement accounts, investment accounts. And it's all because of Donald Trump. But like I said, he doesn't care.
No, the thing is 650, that was in one day. Let's not forget
Right.
the day before was 700 points. The day before that was even more. I mean, we're talking about $5 trillion in the last 10 or 12 days lost in the market. I want people to think about that number for a second. $5 trillion. When Biden left, as you said, we were at an all-time high. In fact, it remained in that same area, up or down, during the last, say, 45 days of this Trump administration. But once he announced these tariffs, everything went into a free fall. Now, you bring up a really important point, which is the people who voted for Trump based off of whether it was tariffs, whether it was his three famous words this time around, which is gasoline and groceries. He went on, and as I said before, making these assertions that tariffs protect American interests. He talked about how that will bring manufacturing back to America. As if you can go into like a Walmart or a Costco and buy an inflatable manufacturing facility, right? Just, pump up for the next, 6 months, and you'll have an inflatable manufacturing facility. These facilities take years to build, not days, not months, but years. And it all sounds really good on paper to these folks. But I want to ask you this, because one of the tariffs that he's imposing, for example, on Canada, is steel and aluminum. He's also imposing tariffs on China, which is where a lot of parts on vehicles come from. There's no doubt in my mind that the United Auto Workers, that unions are going to take a slap, like a slap heard round the world. But I want to even expand that to how do you think that these tariffs are going to impact the American worker? And I'm not just talking about in manufacturing, though I do want you to answer it for manufacturing, like the unions, but also just everyday businesses in this debacle of this global trade tariff war that he's creating.
Yeah. Well, a lot of countries obviously outsource products and materials to China, Canada, Mexico, and other countries. So it's going to affect them. It's going to be increased cost for them. And then ultimately, they're not going to be able to pay some of their workers. Like you said, you're going to see people losing jobs. You're going to see businesses going out or going under because of this, this new rule by him. So it is going to impact small businesses and then employees and workers, especially in the automobile industry and manufacturing and union workers, but they've never cared about union workers. So yeah, it's gonna affect people across the board, whether you're just a consumer or you're a worker in the industry or you're a small business.
I mean, think about construction, the entire construction industry. Again, one of the things he is imposing a 25% tariff on is softwood. Softwood is what's used in the construction of homes. So who again do you think? Do you
Right.
think that these big developers, do you think that they're going to be so magnanimous that they're going to eat the 25% tariff? Or logically, do you think that they're going to pass it on to the consumer, to the buyer of the house? Now, just again, to add more fuel to this fire, already interest rates are exceptionally high. So the cost to buy a house is even going to be increased, which means that you would have to take out a higher mortgage, which means that you're going to be paying higher monthly payments in order to fulfill that mortgage obligation, which most people will not be able to do, especially because they're losing their jobs. And if they're not losing their jobs, they're also losing, for example, if you are a part of a union, you're not going to be getting the overtime that you were getting before because nothing is trading, nothing is selling. Ally, I watched the other day on Fox, they had a guy at a dealership and he said this Ford Ram truck has an MSRP of $80,000, but as a result of the tariff, the owner of the dealership raised the price, knowing that they're going to have increased tariffs, there's going to be less sales, to $100,000. And they said to him, do you really think that that's a smart move? And his comment was, it makes no difference. No one's going to be able to afford it anyway. What's your
Right.
comment?
Yeah, yeah, you can see they're already doing it preemptively, knowing that these tariffs were going into effect. So, yeah, I mean, house prices are already astronomical, plus interest rates that are over 6%. I mean, it's become nearly impossible for people to afford the American dream of owning a home. So, I think a lot of MAGA, Trump supporters thought that it would be easier to own a home and do all those things. And now it's actually going to be a lot more difficult and more difficult than it already is. I think we're going to see a real estate market crash, relatively soon. You have people who are just losing their jobs, especially in this area. I live in Northern Virginia, and federal workers are being laid off left and right. People that I know personally, and they can't afford to live here anymore. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with relatively soon. But ultimately, yeah, no, I think this is just a disaster waiting to happen. And it's just making life more difficult for people who are just trying to get by. I mean, not everyone is, rolling in the dough able to afford a $5 million home. Some people are simply just trying to buy their starter home. And now it's going to be much more difficult to do that.
And think about all of the Gen Zers that are out there. They
Yeah,
are never going to be able
it's my
to
generation. Yeah.
live the American dream that their parents and their grandparents and great grandparents had the opportunity to do so. Things are too expensive. You start to see more and more children refusing to leave their parents' homes because they either don't want to have to deal with the expense or they can't afford the expense. And so, unless they're going to get parental help, and now it's hard for everybody, unless again you're in that 1%. I'm with you 100%. There's going to be a stock market crash, and who's going to pick up all the pieces? Well, it's going to be the one percenters, the hedge funders that are going to come in with massive amounts of money from other funds, and they're just going to buy up all the properties and rent them out and wait for the market to change, again, exploiting the middle and lower class, which is what I believe that these tariffs are going to ultimately do. And it's terrible. I feel so bad for Gen Z and your generation because it is nearly impossible. And I'm not saying that there's not a handful of scenarios that you could point out about young kids making fortunes off of crypto and so on. But you know what? I know people who are in the crypto business. All they do is trade crypto. One time we were out for dinner and the person turned around and said to me, "You're not going to believe it. I crushed it today." I said, "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah. The portfolio that this person has was up about $2.3 million. The next time we had dinner, they turned around and they said to me, I said, "Oh, by the way, how's your crypto doing?" "Fuck you, Michael. I don't want to talk about it." I said, "Why?" "I'm down 5.25,
Wow.
$5.25 million. All right. And now I'm not trading crypto anymore. It's too volatile. I don't want to lose everything that I have. All right. So yeah, we hear stories, success stories, AI success stories. They're handfuls. And these young kids end up becoming part of the 1/10 of 1%ers, and it doesn't affect them. But what about everybody else in their class? And why is it then that Gen Z, there's still a large group of Gen Z that support Trump and his policy ideology?
You know, I think a large part of it, and this has just been my long held belief, is that people just simply aren't very informed or just don't do the research or they just don't care to. They don't care about politics. They hear something somewhere, especially with the spread of misinformation across all social media platforms. They're seeing something and then they're saying, that sounds great. Like you said, like Trump saying, that we're going to bring American manufacturing here as a result of the tariffs. It's just not that simple, but they hear it and it sounds great to them. So I think that's truly the cause of a lot of this Gen Z conservative movement. And it's up to us to push back and to be there to be the opposition voice who's actually providing, real facts and data.
It's true. I mean, just talk about a manufacturing facility for a second. In order to build a automobile manufacturing facility, it requires a ton of steel. This country doesn't produce nearly enough steel for what we already have use for, let alone now to increase it by building several different manufacturing facilities just in the automobile industry. It's why you're right. It sounds great on paper, but in reality,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's an impossibility. On top of that, during his address yesterday, Trump took direct aim at transgender rights, particularly in the context of sports. How do you think that this rhetoric affects public perception of the transgender community, especially young transgender people just trying to find their place in society?
Right. Yeah. They're demonizing them. They're creating this group of people saying, we don't understand your lifestyle or your feelings or choices because, we don't feel the same way you do. And so we're going to demonize you because we don't understand you. Like, you don't have a place in society. Their current outlook is that trans people do not exist. They're mentally ill or they've made it up in their head. and that they shouldn't be allowed to do certain things. They shouldn't be allowed to join the military because it's a mental illness. And I just find the whole thing revolting. Trans people have existed since the beginning of time. They just weren't able to fully express themselves or be out and proud of who they are because of how society was. That's how gay people and lesbian people were as well. It's not that they didn't exist, it's that they were hiding, they were in the closet. And so that's how transgender people have been, and that's how they'll always be. They'll be around. We're not going to ever get to a point where we look back and say that was just like a point in history, which is what they keep saying, is that this is just a sad blip in history. Transgender people will be around, they'll be in our society, and we need to figure out a way to integrate them that's fair and equitable. And it's not excluding transgender high school students from a sport that they love when there's like, it's like 1% of the students in high school sports are actually transgender at that age. And so it's just creating a mountain out of a molehill. It's so frustrating because it's become their big talking point. And I think there is a way to have a common sense solution to including transgender children in the sports they love. And then when they get to an age where maybe they're playing college sports or the NCAA wants to regulate, you know, hey, if this male or this male born, sorry, what's the word? Male at birth person wants to compete in women's sports, he has to undergo certain hormonal therapies. He has to reach a certain level of estrogen so that we can make it fair and safe for all. I think there's a fair and common sense solution to all of this. And it's not saying they can't compete in sports at all, or they have to compete in the sport where that's not the gender that they identify with and they feel completely out of place and don't, it's, you know, it's like there is a common sense middle ground that's also going to be safe and equitable for women as well.
You know, I do have to say though, Trump did a miraculous job last night in demonizing the transgender community. He was masterful in it. He put up into the galley, sitting directly next to Melania, who looked fantastic, had these two young girls sitting there. The first one was a volleyball player.
Yeah.
Of course, it was a show. She was a volleyball player. And he told the story that this transgender born male, female, during a match that she was in, spiked the ball with such ferocity that it hit her in the head and caused brain damage. Brain damage. And they welcomed her, and the Republicans all cheered as the Democrats sat there stoic, stone-faced, arms crossed. And she got up and she started to wave. This young blonde girl, looking very dazed, that she now suffers brain damage from the force of that volleyball hitting her in the head. Now, I have so many questions. So many questions. I have a hard time imagining that a volleyball, I don't care how hard it's spiked and by who. We're talking about high school. Mm-hmm. You're not talking about pros against a 4-year-old. You're talking about high schoolers. And I have a real funny feeling that if nonpartisan doctors took a look at what was going on here, it might have been maybe she got knocked backwards and banged her head. That's certainly possible. No different than two kids getting into a fight. One punches the other in the face, or somebody trips the other guy and he falls on the back of their head and they end up with a serious concussion. But something just smelled wrong. Then they had the mother of a young boy, a young girl, another young girl, I believe it was, who, and this played onto that whole scenario where Trump was claiming that teachers were doing transgender operations, that your daughter or your son leaves the house and comes back as your daughter, and so on. And this mother was there, allegedly, that they were referring to the son as a female in school, that's what the kid wanted, and he is now, with the stroke of a Sharpie, he is going to put an end to all of this. He was masterful in showing real human beings who are being affected by this. But as you said, it is like a piece of sand on the beach. And he's making that one piece of sand the entire beach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, like you said, okay, in theory, if a boy, right, he's a high school student under the age of 18, is able to hit a volleyball that hard to injure a girl, he could also do the same to fellow male athletes, right? Like, I don't think you have a softer head as a girl at that age. I think it's just an unfortunate accident, if you really think about it. And then, yeah, in the other instance, I mean, first of all, it's just nonsensical to think that teachers are performing gender reassignment surgeries in school. I mean, I can't even begin to talk about it, but this is the stuff he does that frightens people. And if they don't know any better, they really genuinely think it's happening. But no, of course, our public schools aren't even funded well enough to have, brand new textbooks and new materials. Of course, they're not performing surgery in school. And I think it actually says a lot about the parents. If your child has to go to school and wants to be referred to as a different pronoun and they are not doing that at home and they're not telling you about it, that's actually a reflection of you as a parent. And it says a lot. It says that they're not comfortable being honest with you. And that's an environment I would never want to create for my kids. I would want them to know that they can be whoever they want to be. And if they feel like there's something wrong or they're not in the right body, they should be able to communicate that to me. And we should all be, in cohesion on this. It's not something they should have to hide. So I think that says more about the parents in this case, obviously, because they're here attending Trump's State of the Union. Yeah. Of course, that they aren't accepting their children. Exactly.
Yep. That they certainly have a breakdown in their familial conversation. Now, he goes on, and in attacking the use of pronouns and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, Trump, while talking about it, is basically, again, appealing to his base. And he has created a base that is concerned about cultural changes. Now, Trump seems, again, to be doing this a lot. And my question to you is, what do you think of the long-term implications of dismantling DEI initiatives on both the corporate and educational institutions?
Well, I think it's negative, first of all, and I think they've spun this to be something that is oppressive to white people, right? Or white men in particular. That, they're going to be selecting this person over you because they are a minority and you're not. When in reality, DEI is about making sure that things are not, or like your gender and your race are not actually available to employers when they are making those hiring decisions. So I know many private companies have DEI programs. My mom's company does. They haven't had any problems with it, but now, of course, this has been another talking point, something to demonize. It's another three-letter acronym. This used to be CRT, and before that it was BLM, and before that it was political correctness. It's just the next thing that they've jumped onto. And it's another scapegoat and something to scare people with. It's funny how CRT just disappeared, right? They said, oh, we beat CRT. CRT is not in elementary schools anymore. It never was to begin with. They didn't do it.
Right.
Shit, pardon my language. But yeah, so it's just something else to freak people out. And mind you, CRT played a humongous role in an election that I worked on in 2021 in Virginia. It was one of the leading factors in why people voted for Glenn Youngkin as the governor of Virginia. And so we still have him as the governor. Now we have an election this year, and it's going to be DEI instead of CRT. So it's just the same playbook over and over again, and normal Americans can see right through it.
Yeah, I will tell you, it is interesting because I saw the other day there was a lawsuit filed by a white woman against her employer, who is a lesbian, part of the LGBTQ plus community, claiming that she was passed over for a promotion that went to another member of the LGBTQ plus community over her. And she claims it has nothing to do with merit, but rather because she's a straight white woman. And that lawsuit now has legs as a direct result of what Trump has created here. That
Right.
you have every right within which to protect your rights as a white heterosexual woman or male for that matter. And I believe that you're going to start seeing whole law firms literally rising up and putting out advertisements. Hey, if you think that you were passed over for somebody else because of your race,
Right.
religion, creed, color, sexual orientation, hey, give us a call. Because nothing like having a negligence lawyer or 10 million of them in this country.
Yeah, yeah, you're going to see companies just being bombarded with litigation over these claims. And so now we're monitoring the hiring practices of millions of companies throughout the US. But truthfully, I think that the right wing believes that if you are a white male, you are categorically more uh, qualified for a role than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
They believe that if they have a white male pilot, they feel more safe and that he was probably hired on merit. What does that say about them, and about you? If that's what you believe, you have a bias that you believe that white males are generally a better fit for a job. And that's something that our country has believed for a long time, and it's still playing a role in society today. So I think it says more about their personal and internal biases than it does about anything else. And
Yep.
that there are plenty of people that are more than qualified for jobs. And just because it's a black pilot or a black member of an administration or whatever it is, does not mean they're a DEI hire or a black mayor. They called him a DEI mayor. I mean, it's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Talk about what if it's a black doctor who happens to
Right.
be the number one neurosurgeon in the country? What if then hypothetically you have a neurological issue? Are you going to turn around and you're going to say, yeah, I think I'm going to go with a different doctor because I suspect that the hospital brought him on based upon DEI, forgetting his qualifications. It's so
Yeah,
stupid that
it's
the
so
question
stupid.
I want to add one other part here. How do you think that these sort of positions are going to play out with, again, Gen Z, the younger voters who actually have grown up more progressive on these issues? Because to be honest, I didn't see that voter. I didn't see the Gen Z, the younger voter, making this much of an issue in the 2024 election. I thought they would, but they
Yeah.
didn't.
hmm Well, I think that there are two factions of Gen Z. And I think that there's an older faction, which is me. I'm on the very brink between millennials and Gen Z. And we grew up in a pre-Trump era. And so I think that faction is a little bit more progressive and more and cares more about human rights. And the younger faction has grown up in the Trump era. All they've seen is Trump. I mean, Trump has been running for office for 12, what is it? Or yes, 2016. It's been 8 years. But
No,
he's
no, he
been
started it initially. He started in 2011.
okay. So there you go. So it's 2025. So it's 14 years. And he's been running in the past three presidential elections, and that's a lot. That's pretty much all the elections of a young person. My sister is 30, and she's never voted in an election where Donald Trump wasn't running. So, I think there's a difference. And so the younger generation has grown up and seen how he has denigrated the morals of this country, and created a more individualistic society, right? Like we don't care as much about our neighbor. We're more focused on us. and we reject things that we don't understand, and that has become fabric of American society. And you can see it in just the way that we interact with each other. And I think that's
Yep.
truly impacted how they've viewed America and how they voted.
Well, during that speech last night, he went on to, of course, praise himself and his migration deportation crackdown, which, as he said, is going great. Of course, poking at the Democrats who sat there, claiming that the Biden administration and these Democrats had fostered open border policies. How do you view the reality of the border situation today? And what do you think are going to be the consequences of his misleading statements on public trust?
Hmm. Well, of course, he's been in office for what, 40 days, and then the right is going, he secured the border's closed. I mean, what? Not much has changed, other than that he sent additional troops or law enforcement down to the border to create kind of optics that we have a more secure border. But no, I mean, we had the highest level of encounters under Joe Biden, which means border control is doing their job. But it's all about optics. He says things that sound great and are true, or that he wants to be true, like the border is closed, and that's what people believe. So, yeah, I mean, I think we all want to see a secure border. We don't, and I don't think we've ever had an open border like they've tried to make it seem. But again, that's just another phrase that they've used. So, and it's stuck, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's been 40 days. We'll see what happens. But ultimately, the border wall is still the same border wall. And it's just reframing of the narrative.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, he even went on yesterday and was so bold to say that there's zero coming through the border since
Which is
he's
just
taken
not true.
office.
Yeah,
It's not true. And what he did, and again, on paper, it's so right. He's framing the immigration policies in terms of safety and national security, something that we all want, something that the
right.
president of the United States is obligated by his position to do, right? To make each of us safe and to provide and ensure national security. But do you think that, because he went on to say that they're now using Guantanamo Bay, they're using internment camps in Panama. You think that his harsh stance is effective in deterring illegal immigration? Because he also made the claim that knowing how rough and tough that he is and how Tom Harmon and the rest of ICE are going to be with these illegal migrants, that they are just not coming here, that they're going elsewhere. Or let me ask you this, do you think that it's effective in deterring this illegal immigration, or do you think that it just perpetuates a toxic narrative about migrants?
I think probably both. I think he's created this other group that people should be afraid of. Again, this is what Republicans are good at, creating the other group, the transgender group, the illegal migrant group, or just migrant group, because he's essentially put an end to legal migration at the moment as well. So I think that, yeah, maybe it has deterred people from wanting to cross the border. I mean, personally, I wouldn't even want to come to this country right now. I think a lot of people are looking at other places to go because it feels like we're being held hostage by our government in many ways. But I also think it's left people out to dry. People that are seeking asylum and have legitimate reasons for wanting to come to the U.S. or people that are here who are working on a green card or a visa and have families here or are married here, have children here, and now they're being separated from their families. It's created a really toxic culture around all of it. And it's people have lost, I mean, Republicans have lost morality along the way. And they're viewing this group of migrants as the cause for all of their problems and that they're the reason why they can't get certain jobs. Well, guess what? Now you're losing your jobs because of the Trump administration, and prices are higher not because of illegal immigrants, but because of the Trump administration. So they've done
Right.
a really good job at assuming this extremely toxic narrative and really toxic attitude towards migrants in general. And mind you, we are all descendants of migrants. Unless you're a Native American, your family came here at some point. And that's what America is all about. That's why we're so great, is because we encourage it's a melting pot. We encourage different ideas and people of different cultures and backgrounds, but that's not what Republicans want. Obviously, they want a monolithic group of white Americans and Christian Americans, and anything other than that is scary to them.
Yeah, it's very, very true. I mean, then he went on to talk about his proposed tax and spending bill, which is aimed to overhaul the system with a focus on corporations and high income earners. How likely do you think of these changes to address the growing income inequality that we have in this country? And what do you think that the impact could be on social services?
Yeah, I mean, they've made it clear that they want to gut Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, and they view people in those systems as leeches, or people who are receiving government handouts. Mind you, Elon Musk paid zero federal taxes for Tesla last year, although making billions of dollars in revenue. So we're not the ones that are leeching. You know, elderly Americans are not the ones who are leeching. It is the billionaire class who's leeching, who are using tax loopholes to evade paying their fair share of taxes. And I just think it's sad what they're trying to do, and it's not fair. And people have paid into these systems their entire lives, and if you pay taxes, you can't possibly be a leech of a system that is supposed to benefit you after paying your way into it your entire life.
Yeah, it's so true. Meanwhile, yesterday, I thought possibly one of the more comical, because yesterday's speech was really nothing more than a reality show, right? I mean, it would have made great Bravo television. He
Right.
started talking about all of the money that DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, has been able to identify and to cut these spurious sort of programs. And he started listing them off to the chuckle of the Republicans in Congress. He started out with things like $22 billion from the Department of Health and Human Services to provide free housing and cars to illegal aliens. All right. I'm not sure that that really exists. And I would really personally like to see that program.
Mm-hmm.
Identify it other than just talking about it is the point I'm trying to make. But they don't do that. They shove it right down your fucking throat with basically nothing more than talking points that I believe, Ally, you and I and all of my listeners would agree. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Free housing and cars. What about me? What about me? So I got to get up every morning at 6, go to work. I have to pay my mortgage or pay my rent. I have to pay my lease on a car, or I had to buy it outright, whatever it might be. They're getting free housing and free cars. I don't know that that even exists. He then goes on and he listed another whole slew of dubious foreign aid grants, again, to the chuckle of the GOP. $45 million for diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarships in Burma. $8 million for LGBTQI programs in Lesotho. He goes on to say, which no one has even heard of. To be honest, I don't even know where that is either. You know what Lesotho is? No, me neither. And $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants something again that I don't know where they're even getting this from. It goes on and on. He then went on, and again, people were laughing. It was a wonderful performance if you were going to the comedy cafe. But he then goes on and he continues to repeat, even though it's been debunked, one, the amount of money that the United States has given to Ukraine. He, of course, over exaggerates that by 300%. He also talks about Social Security, that 100-year-old people are receiving Social Security, like 13 million of them, and 13 million of the age of 110 to 119, and then another millions or so, 119 to 129. He even brought it up that there's individuals, one or two, over the age of 360 years who are receiving Social Security. But don't worry, we are going to find these people and we are going to get that money back and hold them accountable. I'm going to make a prediction here, right here on my Mea Culpa podcast, that there are no people identified and that nobody gets held accountable. What was your thoughts during that comedy show?
Yeah, no, it's exactly how you described it. He's entertaining, right? Like he makes everything funny or a joke. And I'm like, he would be a great stand-up artist, but he's not a great president. And like these are serious matters. But no, I mean the claim about the 100-plus-year-old, 115-plus-year-old people receiving Social Security, that's already been debunked. It is true that there are a lot of people who are still in the system who haven't had their deaths marked necessarily, but these people aren't receiving payments. And that's something that has been investigated and debunked. So they're lying about that, first of all. And then, like you said, he just makes up numbers out of nowhere sometimes. Like, I'm like,
No,
where
no,
did
not
you even get
sometimes.
that
No,
from?
no, not sometimes.
All the time. All
It's
the time.
all the time, right?
Yeah.
He makes up numbers in order to prove his position. So if I
Yeah.
turned around and I said, let's say, you're in your 20s, right? And I turn around and I said, Ally is 75 years old, all right? And she's receiving Social Security payments based upon her age. And you're like, look at me. Either I have the greatest plastic surgeon in the planet, in the universe, or you're wrong. Doesn't make a difference to him. He's willing to
Yeah.
say it if it will prove his point.
Totally. He makes like grand, broad statements, and then he just straight up lies, and people hear it, and it sounds good to them, so it makes sense. But if you actually do the research or just simply look up a fact check, you'll see that, yeah, he lied
Okay,
about Ukraine.
right. But okay, here's what we know, that the American people are misinformed, grossly misinformed.
100%.
Even the young Gen Zers that are in college, they do not do research in order to debunk anything that Trump is saying. They just don't do it. They will go to TikTok, they will go to X, they will go to Substack, they will go wherever the hell that they go for their information, and they accept it for what it is. What do we do as Democrats to change
Yeah.
this lazy ideology of fact checking? Because one thing for certain, this administration, and I'm not just referring to Trump, I'm referring to the entire cabinet, they either continue to promote these falsities or they create them themselves. What do we do to change that narrative?
Yeah. Well, it's up to each of us individually to put out facts into the ether, into the universe, whether that's on Twitter, it's on TikTok, it's on Instagram, it's on YouTube, it's on Substack. I'm on all the platforms. And what I do on TikTok is fact check in a way that's digestible for people to understand. And if they see it across their timeline, then that's someone who that might not have seen, like, might not have known that information otherwise. They might have watched a speech and said, that sounds great. And then they see this information, they're like, wait, really? And then maybe they go look it up after. I don't know. but it is up to us because these lies will permeate. People will see something on the internet, and then it starts getting served up to them over and over until it backs up this line of thinking that they already have. So it literally is up to us to continue to put truth out there, and to change people's minds. And it is tough. It is really tough. We're dealing with a really toxic environment, especially on Twitter, of censoring. And even Elon Musk is one of the biggest distributors of misinformation. And he got community noted the other day on his own platform. But he doesn't care because he's reinforcing the narratives about certain things, just sharing them, certain stats that are just completely not wrong. I think he shared, what did he share? It was something. About how American banks aren't allowed to operate in Canada. And that was immediately fact checked because it's just not true. And Justin Trudeau had to fact check him personally. So
But see, this is the problem, though. See, Justin Trudeau will do the fact checking because he's got
yeah,
100 people working for him. I'm talking about the Gen Z kid who, even if he hears Michael Cohen, even if he hears Ally Sammarco, even if he hears Norm Eisen, Jamie Raskin, Harry Littman, doesn't make a difference. They're hearing from Trump. They're
right.
hearing from Elon Musk, the richest guy in the world, turning around and saying, whoa, are you really saying that US banks cannot have branches and work in Canada? Fuck Canada. And as far as I'm concerned, let's impose the tariffs on them. Their entire mindset becomes vitriolic, combative, and so on, all off of misinformation. I just don't know what anybody can do within which to put out enough legitimate information to debunk the fire hose of misinformation that is coming out of the GOP and this administration.
Yeah. Well, that has been our problem for so long. And that's why I think Donald Trump got reelected because he spews so much nonsense every day. He says ridiculous things every day and he makes it entertaining. And so people tune in and they want to look at his tweets and his true social posts and they want to watch his speeches because they're funny, but they're absorbing that information. And like I said, I think with Gen Z, it's just about maximum output of the I mean, for people like me, that's what I have to do and that's what I'm going to do every day. Right now we don't have a leader in the party. Like we really don't. We have a DNC chair who just got elected. We have Speaker of the House Hakeem Jeffries, but we don't have someone who's at that level of Donald Trump who's out there every day. We had that during the election, but we don't have it anymore. And so it really is just about us who are at the base of the Democratic Party who have a lot of followers to do that. And so what I've been doing recently is just like on Twitter, if I see a post from a lot of like a right wing person and I have a feed that's just right wing people, and it's wrong or it's misinformation, I respond to it and I correct them. Because I'm like, if someone sees their post, and this is how I used to be as a former Republican, I would see it and I would look at the replies, and if no one was correcting them, I'm like, okay, they must be right. And so I'm like, I'm going to be that person who's correcting them, and I'm going to be that voice of opposition so they can look and see, oh, maybe that isn't true. And it's just little things like that. I think if we're all doing that, we can push back on the narrative and the lies. But it is really tough. It is tough.
Yeah. Well, look, like as I said to you, the hour goes by quick. I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
One of the most notable aspects of his speech last night was his promise to repeal the Chips and Science Act. And what nobody started talking about, not when he said it, not after he said it, the Chips and Science Act is a bipartisan law. It was done bipartisan. Why do you think that he's pushing against what has continuously has been seen as a victory for American innovation and competitiveness, which, by the way, happens to be what this administration is promoting? Why repeal it? Why not just maybe tweak it and put your name onto it.
Well, I'm sure he probably doesn't even know what's in it, to be honest. He probably has heard the name on cable news and he knows what Joe Biden got credit for it. And that's something he cannot stand, which is other people getting credit for things. And so his legacy is going to be to undo everything that Joe Biden did before him. And that's why he's been promising to repeal Obamacare for years, is because Obama's name is attached to it. And he never had a plan to replace it because he doesn't care about that. He just cares about him having the attention, him having the credit and the glory for things that he has nothing to do with. So I simply think that is the reason, because Joe Biden is considered the one to have championed that legislation and signed it, that he now wants to get rid of it.
Well, he certainly was denigrating to Biden and the Biden administration on every opportunity. In fact,
yeah, he can't help himself.
Anybody that was watching it, and that was being watched around the world, I'm with you. They saw it as comedy. They enjoyed it, all 100 minutes of it, the longest ever in history. 100-minute joint session of Congress speech by the president, of which got a lot of entertaining clips. There were moments, and many of them, where it was like a comedy show. And I'm curious to see how the ratings were, because I know that's all that Trump cares about.
Exactly.
What was the ratings? How many people watched it, and so on. Well, Ally,
elect a clown and you get a circus. So
there you go, Ally. Great to see you. I'll see you on TikTok and Substack and everywhere else that you have. You want to remind my listeners where you're at?
Yeah. So on Twitter, I'm at Ally, ALLY _Sammarco, SAMMARCO. And then on Instagram, I'm Ally Sammarco Politics. And Substack, I have a newsletter that goes out every single day. It's free, and it's called Today's American News. So just go to today'samericannews.com. And thank you guys. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Ally. I'll see you soon.